Welcome to Crazy HOA Moments. The HOA wanted control, not truth. I manage a restaurant kitchen in Salt Lake City, and my entire life runs on tight timing and prep windows. The woman standing on my driveway is screaming that my truck is getting towed in 10 minutes unless I pay a fee I already paid 3 weeks ago, and she is waving a laminated policy sheet like it is a warrant. Her name is Amy Reed. She is the Rules Enforcement Chair for the Clearbrook Estates Association, and she is holding a handheld radio like she is about to summon an entire compliance battalion. I work nights, I support family back home, and I cannot afford surprise fees or a tow bill that should not even exist. Amy slams a metal clipboard onto the hood of my truck and says the payment never posted, so the violation stands and the tow is authorized. I pull out my phone and show her the receipt with the timestamp, and she does not even look at it. She just shakes her head and says the portal shows unpaid, so the receipt does not matter. That is when I realize this is not about the fee. This is about something else, something older, and I am standing in the middle of it. 3 weeks ago, I logged into the HOA portal to pay my quarterly assessment. I uploaded the payment, got the confirmation email, and filed the receipt in my kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus and spare aprons. The portal showed paid. I checked it twice because I know how Clearbrook Estates operates. They love to send violation notices for things you already fixed, and they especially love to send them right before a long weekend when the management office is closed and you cannot dispute anything until Monday. Amy Reed has been Rules Enforcement Chair for 6 years, and in that time the neighborhood has turned into a place where the board uses vendors as muscle and pretends it is policy. If you park your truck at the wrong angle, you get a warning. If you leave your trash bin out past 8 in the morning, you get a fine. If you push back on any of it, you get another notice for failing to comply with the dispute process, which somehow requires 3 different forms and a hearing date that is always scheduled when you are at work. Tonight, I got home from a double shift at the restaurant and found a bright orange notice zip-tied to my door handle. The notice said my quarterly payment was rejected, the account was delinquent, and a tow vendor had been authorized to remove my vehicle within 48 hours unless I paid the original fee plus a late penalty and a compliance processing charge. I checked the portal on my phone, and the payment I made 3 weeks ago was gone. The transaction line was still there, but the status had changed from paid to failed, and the timestamp on the status change was today at 4 in the afternoon. I was in the kitchen prepping a catering order at 4 in the afternoon. I did not touch the portal. Someone else did. I called the management office and got voicemail. I called the emergency line and got a recording that said emergencies are defined as flooding, fire, or structural collapse, and payment disputes do not qualify. I sent an email to the board with my receipt attached and a very polite request to explain why my payment disappeared. Then I drove to the management office, which closes at 5, and it was already locked. A security guard was hovering near the clubhouse door, and I asked if anyone from the board was still inside. He said Amy Reed had just left, and she mentioned something about a tow scheduled for tomorrow morning. I asked for her contact information, and he said he could not give that out, but he could take a message. I handed him a printed copy of my receipt and asked him to make sure Amy got it tonight. He looked at the receipt, looked at me, and said he would try, but Amy does not usually check messages after hours. I went home and pulled every document I had related to the HOA, payment receipts going back 2 years, violation notices, dispute forms, minutes from board meetings I attended, emails, portal screenshots. I spread them all out on my kitchen table and started looking for a pattern, because this was not the first time something weird had happened with the Clearbrook Estates financials. 2 years ago, a neighbor named Marcus filed a complaint about missing funds in the reserve account. He said the quarterly statements did not match the line items in the approved budget, and he wanted an independent audit. The board scheduled a hearing. Marcus showed up with a binder full of spreadsheets, and the board voted to table the issue pending further review. The review never happened. Marcus got a violation notice 2 weeks later for storing a kayak on his side yard, which violated a rule about recreational equipment that nobody had ever enforced before. He fought it, lost, paid the fine, and moved out 6 months later. I remember thinking at the time that it felt like retaliation, but I did not have proof, and I was new to the neighborhood, so I kept my head down and paid my fees on time. Now I am wondering if Marcus was onto something, and if that something is about to bury me too. The next morning, I wake up to the sound of a diesel engine idling in front of my house. I look out the window and see a flatbed tow truck with Clearbrook Estates Association printed on the door in vinyl letters. A driver is standing next to my truck with a clipboard, and Amy Reed is standing next to him with her handheld radio clipped to her belt and her bright phone case held up like a badge. I grab my receipt, my phone, and my visor, and I walk outside in my work shirt. Amy sees me coming and raises one hand like a traffic cop. She says the tow is authorized, the fee is unpaid, and I need to step back and let the driver do his job. I hold up the receipt and say I paid 3 weeks ago. The portal confirmed it, and someone changed the status without my knowledge. Amy does not even look at the receipt. She says the portal is the official record, and the portal shows unpaid, so the receipt is not valid. I ask her to explain how a paid transaction can turn into a failed transaction 3 weeks later without anyone touching it. She says system glitches happen, and it is my responsibility to monitor my account and report discrepancies within 72 hours, which I did not do. So the fee stands. The tow driver looks uncomfortable. He glances at Amy, then at me, then at his clipboard. He says he needs proper authorization before he hooks anything, and if there is a payment dispute, he would rather wait until it is resolved. Amy cuts him off and says the authorization is already on file. She submitted it yesterday, and the dispute process does not stop enforcement. She waves her laminated policy sheet and reads a sentence out loud about how compliance actions proceed independently of appeals. The driver shrugs and says he will call his dispatch to confirm. Amy says that is not necessary. She is the chair, and her word is authorization enough. The driver says he still needs to call. Amy steps closer to him and says if he does not proceed, she will report him to his supervisor for refusing a contracted job. And Clearbrook Estates pays his company a lot of money for fast response, so he should think carefully about what fast response means. I pull out my phone and start recording. I do not say anything. I just hold the phone up so Amy can see the red dot. She turns toward me and her face goes from annoyed to furious in about 2 seconds. She says I do not have permission to record her. This is private property and I need to delete that immediately. I say the driveway is part of the common area easement according to the CC&Rs, and I have every right to document what happens on my own property. She says that is not how it works. I am interfering with official business, and she is going to add a harassment charge to my account if I do not put the phone away. I keep recording. The driver makes his call. He steps away from us and talks quietly into his phone for about 30 seconds. Then he walks back and says his dispatch wants written confirmation that the fee is actually unpaid before he hooks anything. Amy says she already provided written confirmation. The driver says he needs to see it. Amy pulls a folded notice out of her jacket pocket and hands it to him. The driver unfolds it, reads it, and says this notice is dated today, but the payment dispute is from 3 weeks ago, so how can the tow be authorized today if the dispute was never resolved? Amy says the dispute was resolved in the board meeting last night, and the resolution was that the fee is unpaid and the tow is authorized. I stop recording and say there was no board meeting last night. Amy says yes there was, it was an emergency session, and I was notified by email. I check my phone and there is no email. I check my spam folder and there is no email. I say I did not get any notification. Amy says that is not her problem, the email was sent, and if I did not receive it, I need to check my settings. I ask her who else was at this emergency meeting. She says the board president and the treasurer. I ask for the minutes. She says the minutes are not available yet, they will be posted within 10 business days per the bylaws. I say I want to see the authorization paperwork for the tow. She says I just saw it. I say I want a copy. She says I can request a copy through the records request process, which requires a written form and a $5 processing fee, and the response time is up to 30 days. The driver is shaking his head now. He says this is getting too complicated, he is not hooking anything until he sees official board minutes or a signed authorization from the management company, and he is going to leave. Amy steps in front of him and says if he leaves, she will call his supervisor and report that he refused a valid job, and his company will lose the contract with Clearbrook Estates, which is worth thousands of dollars a year. The driver says he does not care, he is not going to hook someone's truck based on a same-day notice with no backup documentation, and he has other calls. He walks to his truck, gets in, and drives away. Amy watches him go. Then she turns to me and says this is not over. She says I just cost her vendor relationship credibility. I just demonstrated that I am willing to interfere with enforcement, and she is going to make sure the board knows exactly how uncooperative I am. She pulls out her handheld radio. presses the button and says into it that she needs a compliance report filed for obstruction and harassment, and she wants it flagged for the next board meeting. I watch her walk to her car, and I keep my phone in my pocket because I am saving one clip for the finale. I have no idea what that clip is yet, but I know I am going to need something bigger than a receipt to stop this. I go back inside and I start digging. I pull up every board meeting minute I can find on the HOA website going back 3 years. I download them all as PDFs and I start reading. Most of them are boring procedural stuff, landscaping bids, paint color approvals, fence height complaints. But in the minutes from 2 years ago, I find the meeting where Marcus presented his reserve account concerns. The minutes say Marcus raised questions about discrepancies between the budget and the statements, and the board agreed to conduct an internal review. The next month's minutes say the internal review is ongoing. The month after that, the minutes do not mention it at all. I search the rest of the minutes for any follow-up and there is nothing. The review just disappeared. I search for Marcus's violation notice in my files, and I find a scan I saved when he asked me to look at it before he moved. The notice is dated 2 weeks after he raised the reserve account issue, and it cites a rule about recreational equipment storage that is not in the version of the CC&Rs I have. I pull up the current CC&Rs on the website, and the rule is there now, but it is marked as amended last year. I check the amendment log, and it says the rule was added by board vote in a meeting from 18 months ago, which is 6 months after Marcus got the notice. So either the notice cited a rule that did not exist yet, or someone backdated the amendment to make the notice look legitimate after the fact. I take a screenshot of the amendment log. I take a screenshot of Marcus's notice. I put them side by side and I see the problem. The rule number on the notice matches the current rule number, but the language is slightly different. The notice says recreational equipment, and the current rule says recreational vehicles or equipment. The wording changed, which means the rule was revised at least once after Marcus got the notice, but the amendment log only shows one revision, and it is dated after the notice. Someone either wrote the notice using a draft version of the rule before it was officially adopted, or they wrote the notice, then created the rule, then backdated the amendment to cover their tracks. I check the meeting minutes from the month the amendment was supposedly adopted. The minutes mention a vote on CC&R updates, but they do not list which rules were updated. They just say the updates were approved unanimously and the revised document will be posted within 30 days. I check the posted date on the current CC&R's PDF, and the file metadata says it was created 8 months ago, which is 10 months after the meeting where the updates were supposedly approved. So the official document was not posted within 30 days. It was posted 10 months late, and by the time it went up, nobody was paying attention anymore. I am starting to see a pattern. Someone on the board is very good at making problems disappear by burying them in procedure, and they are very good at using the rules to punish people who ask too many questions. Marcus asked about missing money, and he got hit with a violation that cited a rule that did not exist yet. Now I am asking about a missing payment, and I am getting threatened with a tow and a harassment charge. The common thread is Amy Reed. She was Rules Enforcement Chair when Marcus got his notice, and she is Rules Enforcement Chair now. She is the one who authorized the tow. She is the one who keeps waving the laminated policy sheet. She is the one who said we can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. I need to talk to Marcus, but I do not have his contact information and I do not know where he moved. I check the old meeting minutes for his name, and I find an email address he used to submit his reserve account complaint. I send him an email with the subject line Clearbrook Estates Cold Case, you were right, and I attach the screenshots I just made. I do not expect a reply because the email is 2 years old and he probably does not check it anymore, but I send it anyway because I am out of options. Then I go to work because I have a prep shift starting in 2 hours and I cannot afford to miss it. My phone buzzes halfway through my shift. It is an email from Marcus. He says he still checks that address once a week because he filed a complaint with the state HOA ombudsman, and he wanted to make sure he did not miss any updates. He says the ombudsman never followed up, and he assumed the case was closed. He says he kept copies of everything, and if I want to see them, he can send me a zip file. I reply yes, send everything, and I give him my personal email. 20 minutes later, I get a zip file with 32 documents inside. Bank statements, budget spreadsheets, meeting minutes, emails between Marcus and the board, a timeline he built showing when money went missing and when the board stonewalled him. A photograph of a check made out to a vendor called Rapid Response Services with a memo line that says emergency landscape repair, even though there was no emergency and no landscape repair line item in the budget that quarter. I open the check photo on my phone and I zoom in. The check is signed by the treasurer, but the signature is illegible. The date is 2 years ago, 1 month before Marcus raised his concerns. The amount is $6,000. I cross-reference the amount with the budget Marcus attached, and there is no $6,000 expense listed anywhere. I check the quarterly statement from that same period, and there is a line item for landscape maintenance, but it is only $2,000, and it is marked as paid to a different vendor. I do not know what Rapid Response Services is, but I know it is not the landscaping company Clearbrook Estates uses, because I see their truck in the neighborhood twice a month and the name on the truck is Green Valley Landscape. I search for Rapid Response Services online, and I find a business registration in Utah, but the website is dead and the phone number goes to a disconnected message. I search for the business owner name in the registration records, and it is listed as A. Reed. I search for A. Reed in Salt Lake City, and I find Amy Reed, Rules Enforcement Chair, Clearbrook Estates Association, and a home address about 10 miles from my neighborhood. Amy Reed owns the vendor that got paid $6,000 for a job that never happened, and Marcus caught it 2 years ago, and the board buried him with violations until he gave up and moved. Now Amy is trying to bury me the same way, because my payment disappeared right after I pushed back on a different fee last month. I filed a dispute about a late notice I got for trash bin placement, and I won the dispute because I had a photo showing my bin was in the correct spot at the correct time. The board overturned the fee, and Amy was the one who had to send the reversal email, and she was not happy about it. She said in the email that the reversal does not set a precedent and future violations will be enforced regardless of photographic evidence, because the rules are clear and compliance is mandatory. I thought it was just sour grapes. Now I realize it was a warning. I forward Marcus's zip file to my personal laptop and I start building my own timeline. I include his check photo, his budget spreadsheet, his violation notice, and my payment receipt. I include the amendment log screenshot and the meeting minutes where the reserve account review disappeared. I include the email Amy sent me about the trash bin dispute. I include the orange notice from last night and the recording I made of Amy threatening the tow driver. I print everything and I put it in a 3-ring binder with tabs and page numbers, because I am going to need it organized when I drop it on the table in front of the board. But first, I need to figure out what happened to my payment, and I need to do it fast, because the management office closes soon, and I have one shot to deliver the dispute packet in person. I call the management office, and I get a real person this time. Her name is Janet, and she is the office manager. I ask her if she can explain why a paid transaction turned into a failed transaction 3 weeks after it posted. She says she does not have access to the payment system that is handled by a third-party processor, but she can submit a ticket and they usually respond within 3 business days. I say I do not have 3 business days, I have a tow threat and a board meeting coming up, and I need answers today. She sighs and says she will see what she can do, but she cannot promise anything. I give her my account number and my email, and she says she will call me back if she finds anything. 2 hours later, Janet calls me back. She says she pulled my account history, and she sees the payment I made 3 weeks ago. She says the payment posted successfully and it stayed posted for 2 weeks. Then, 3 days ago, someone logged into the admin portal and manually changed the status to failed. She says the admin log shows the change was made by a board officer account, but it does not say which officer. I ask her if she can find out which officer. She says she can submit a request to the processor, but it will take time. I ask her if she can tell me anything else about the account that made the change. She says all she can see is that it was a board officer account. It was accessed from an IP address in Salt Lake City, and the change was made at 4:12 in the afternoon 3 days ago. I ask her if she can give me the IP address. She says no, that is private information, but she can include it in the ticket if I want to escalate. I say yes, escalate it, and send me a copy of the admin log screenshot if you can. Janet says she is not supposed to do that, but she can see I am getting screwed here, and she does not like it when board members mess with the payment system because it makes her job harder. She says she will email me a screenshot with the personal details redacted, and if anyone asks, I did not get it from her. I thank her, and 10 minutes later I have a screenshot showing my payment status change, the timestamp and the account ID that made the change. The account ID is labeled board_officer_02, which does not tell me who it is, but it tells me it is not the president, because the president is always board_officer_01. I cross-reference the board roster on the HOA website, and Officer 2 is the treasurer. The treasurer is a man named Scott, and I have never had any problems with him. I do not think he is the one who changed my payment. I think someone else used his login. I call Scott and leave a voicemail asking if he changed my payment status 3 days ago. He calls me back an hour later and says no, he has not logged into the admin portal in over a month, and he has no idea why my payment would be marked as failed. I ask him if anyone else has access to his login. He says no, the logins are individual and password protected, but he did give his password to Amy Reed 6 months ago because she said she needed to pull a report for a compliance audit and the admin portal was the only place to get it. I ask him if he changed his password after that. He says no, he did not think about it, and he assumes Amy did not keep the password because she never asked for it again. I thank him and I hang up, and now I know exactly what happened. Amy used Scott's login to change my payment status, and she did it 3 days ago right after I won the trash bin dispute. She wanted to retaliate, so she manufactured a new violation, and she used the payment system to do it because she thought I would not be able to prove anything. She did not count on Janet being willing to pull the admin log, and she did not count on me keeping every receipt and screenshot. Now I have proof that someone on the board tampered with my account, and I have a timeline showing that Amy has been running a compliance scam for at least 2 years, and I have a vendor payment that ties her directly to missing HOA funds. I print the admin log screenshot and I add it to my binder. I print Scott's contact information and I add a note that he confirmed he gave his password to Amy. I print the business registration for Rapid Response Services showing A. Reed as the owner. I print the check photo Marcus sent me showing the $6,000 payment to Rapid Response Services with no corresponding budget line. I tab everything, I number the pages, and I make 3 copies. One for me, one for the board, and one for the management company in case the board tries to make the meeting copy disappear. I drive to the management office and I walk in with my binder. Janet is at the front desk, and she sees me coming and she already looks nervous. I hand her one of the binder copies and I say I need this submitted as evidence for the next board meeting, and I need it logged in the official record so nobody can say I did not provide it. She takes the binder, flips through it, and her eyes go wide. She says this is a lot, and she is not sure the board is going to want to hear it. I say they do not have a choice, I am a homeowner, and I have a right to present evidence at a board meeting. She says technically I do, but I need to submit an agenda request form at least 10 days in advance, and the next meeting is in 6 days, so I am too late. I say fine, I will submit the form now for the meeting after that, but I also want this binder on file today so there is a timestamp showing when I delivered it. She says she can do that, and she stamps the cover page with a received date and logs it in the record book. I ask her if there is any way to get this in front of the board sooner, because I have a tow threat and a harassment charge being filed, and I need to stop this before it gets worse. She thinks for a minute, then she says the board president sometimes holds office hours on Thursdays, and if I show up and ask to speak with him, he might give me 10 minutes. I say when is the next Thursday office hour? She says tomorrow at 4. I say I will be there. If you are enjoying this story, please hit like and subscribe, because the payoff is going to be worth it. I leave the management office and I drive home, and on the way I see Amy Reed driving slowly past my house in a golf cart with Clearbrook Estates Association printed on the side. She has her handheld radio clipped to her belt and she is staring at my driveway like she is counting the seconds my trash bin is visible from the street. I pull into my driveway and I park, and she circles the block and comes back around. I get out of my truck and I stand there with my phone in my hand, and she stops the golf cart about 20 feet away. She does not say anything. She just stares at me, then she lifts her radio and says something into it that I cannot hear. Then she drives away. I go inside and I check the HOA portal, and there is a new notice posted to my account. The notice says I am being charged a $50 fee for verbal harassment of a board officer, and the fee is due within 10 days or it will be sent to collections. The notice is dated today, and it cites the interaction I had with Amy this morning when the tow driver left. It says I used threatening language and intimidating behavior, and I interfered with official enforcement actions. It does not mention that I was recording, and it does not mention that the tow driver left because Amy could not provide proper authorization. It just says I harassed her, and now I owe $50. I take a screenshot of the notice, and I add it to my binder. Then I send an email to the board president with the subject line "Urgent Dispute" regarding false harassment charge and retaliation. And I attach the screenshot, the recording I made this morning, and a 2-paragraph summary explaining that Amy is retaliating against me for winning a prior dispute and for questioning a payment discrepancy. I do not mention the vendor payment or Marcus's case yet, because I am saving that for the office hour meeting tomorrow. I just want the board president to know that I have evidence and I am not going to roll over. The next day, I show up at the management office at 3:55. The board president is already there. His name is Richard, and he is a retired accountant who has been president for 4 years. He is sitting in a conference room with a cup of coffee and a stack of file folders, and he looks tired. Janet walks me in and introduces me, and Richard shakes my hand and says he got my email. He says he watched the recording, and he agrees that the harassment charge is not supported by what he saw, and he is going to recommend the board drop it. I say thank you, but that is not the only issue. I say I have evidence that my payment was tampered with, and I have evidence that the same thing happened to another homeowner 2 years ago, and I think there is a pattern of retaliation and financial misconduct that needs to be investigated. Richard sets down his coffee and says that is a serious accusation. I say I know, and I would not be here if I did not have proof. I open my binder and I walk him through the timeline. I show him Marcus's check photo. I show him the business registration for Rapid Response Services. I show him the admin log screenshot showing my payment status was changed by a board officer account. I show him the email from Scott confirming he gave his password to Amy. Richard listens to all of it, and his face goes from tired to grim. He says if this is accurate, it is a major problem, and the board needs to bring in an auditor and possibly an attorney. He says he cannot take any action today, but he will call an emergency board meeting for this weekend, and he wants me to present everything I just showed him. He says he will also contact the management company and ask them to freeze Amy's access to the admin portal until the investigation is complete. I say thank you, and I appreciate you taking this seriously. Richard says he has to take it seriously, because if what I am showing him is true, then the association has a fiduciary duty to investigate, and the board can be held personally liable if we ignore it. He says he never liked the way Amy ran compliance, and he has had multiple homeowners complain about her tactics over the years. But nobody ever brought him documentation like this before. He says most people just pay the fees and move on, because fighting the HOA is exhausting and expensive, and the board knows it. I say that is exactly why this has gone on for so long, because Amy is counting on people being too tired or too scared to push back. Richard says he agrees, and that is going to stop as of today. I leave the meeting feeling like I finally have an ally, but I know Amy is not going to take this quietly. She is going to escalate, and I need to be ready. I go home and I check my email, and there is a new message from the HOA attorney. The subject line says, "Cease and desist regarding defamatory statements," and the body of the email says I am required to stop making false accusations against board members, and if I continue, the association will pursue legal action for defamation and harassment. The email does not specify what statements I supposedly made, and it does not provide any evidence that anything I said was false. It just threatens me and tells me to be quiet. I forward the email to Richard, and I ask him if he authorized the attorney to send this. He replies within 5 minutes and says no, he did not authorize it, and he is going to call the attorney right now to find out who did. 10 minutes later, Richard calls me and says the attorney was contacted by Amy this afternoon, and she told him I was spreading false rumors about her and the board, and she wanted him to shut me down before I caused reputational harm. Richard says he told the attorney to disregard Amy's request, and he explained that there is an active investigation and I am providing evidence, not spreading rumors. He says the attorney apologized and said he will send a follow-up email retracting the cease and desist. I say thank you, and I ask Richard if Amy knows about the emergency board meeting this weekend. He says not yet, but she will as soon as he sends the meeting notice, which he is required to do at least 48 hours in advance. I say she is going to try to stop it. Richard says she can try, but she does not have the votes, and the meeting is happening. That night, I get a knock on my door at 9:30. I look through the peephole and I see a sheriff's deputy standing on my porch. I open the door and the deputy asks if I am me, and I say yes. He hands me a manila envelope and says I am being served with a restraining order petition filed by Amy Reed. He says there is a hearing scheduled for next week, and I need to appear or the order will be granted by default. I open the envelope and I read the petition, and it says I have been stalking Amy, threatening her and interfering with her duties as a board officer. It says I recorded her without consent, I sent harassing emails, and I showed up at her home uninvited. None of that is true. I never went to her home. I recorded her on my property during a tow threat. I sent one email to the board, and it was not harassing. The petition is full of lies, and it is clearly designed to intimidate me and make me look unstable before the emergency board meeting. I call Richard and I tell him what just happened. He says that is absurd, and he is going to make sure the board knows about it at the meeting. He says Amy is clearly trying to derail the investigation by making me look like the problem, and it is not going to work. He says the meeting is still on for Saturday at 10 in the morning, and he expects me to be there with my binder and any other evidence I have. I say I will be there, and I am not backing down. Friday afternoon, I get a call from a contractor I have worked with before. His name is Miguel, and he does maintenance and repair work for a couple of HOAs in the area, including Clearbrook Estates. He says he heard through the vendor network that Amy is trying to get me towed again, and he wanted to give me a heads up. He says Amy called his company yesterday and asked if they could provide a tow truck for an emergency removal, and when his boss asked for the authorization paperwork, Amy said it was being processed and she would send it later. Miguel's boss said no paperwork means no tow, and Amy got angry and said she would take her business elsewhere. Miguel says his boss does not like Amy because she has a reputation for pushing vendors to do things without proper documentation, and then she blames them when it goes wrong. He says if I need someone to back me up at the meeting, he will show up and tell the board what he knows. I say yes, please come, and thank you for the warning. Miguel says no problem, and he will see me Saturday morning. Saturday morning, I wake up early and I review my binder one more time. I check the HOA website to confirm the meeting time and location, and I see that the meeting notice was posted yesterday. The notice says the meeting is an emergency session to discuss a compliance matter, and it is open to all homeowners. It does not mention my name, but I know everyone is going to figure out what it is about as soon as I start talking. I print one more copy of the binder, and I drive to the clubhouse. The parking lot is more crowded than I expected. There are at least 20 cars, which is a lot for a Saturday morning emergency meeting. I walk inside, and the conference room is packed. Richard is at the head of the table with the other board members. Amy is sitting 2 seats away from him, and she has her laminated policy sheet on the table in front of her and her handheld radio clipped to her belt. She sees me walk in and her face goes tight. I sit down in the back row next to Miguel, and I set my binder on my lap. Richard calls the meeting to order and says the purpose of this session is to review allegations of financial misconduct and retaliation within the compliance process. He says the board has a duty to investigate these allegations thoroughly, and he expects everyone to participate in good faith. He says I will be presenting evidence, and the board will ask questions, and then the board will decide what actions to take. Amy raises her hand and says she objects to this meeting on procedural grounds. She says I did not submit an agenda request form in advance, and the board should not be entertaining unverified complaints without proper notice. Richard says this is an emergency session called by the president, and procedural rules are flexible in emergencies. Amy says there is no emergency, this is just a disgruntled homeowner trying to avoid paying his fees. Richard says we will let the evidence speak for itself, and he asks me to come forward. I walk to the front of the room and I open my binder. I start with Marcus's case. I show the board the check photo, the business registration, the budget spreadsheet, and the violation notice. I explain that Marcus raised concerns about missing funds 2 years ago, and the board promised to review it, and the review never happened. I explain that Marcus got a violation notice 2 weeks later for a rule that did not exist at the time, and the rule was backdated to make the notice look legitimate. I show the amendment log and the meeting minutes proving the timeline does not add up. Amy interrupts and says this is ancient history, and Marcus left the neighborhood, so his complaints are irrelevant. I say his complaints are relevant because the same thing is happening to me now. I show the board my payment receipt and the admin log screenshot. I explain that my payment was manually changed to failed 3 days after I won a prior dispute, and the change was made using a board officer login. I explain that the treasurer confirmed he gave his password to Amy, and he did not change it afterward. I show the harassment charge notice and the recording I made of the tow driver interaction. I explain that the harassment charge is retaliation for questioning the payment discrepancy, and the tow threat was based on a payment that I already made and someone deliberately erased. Amy stands up and says this is defamation. She says I am accusing her of crimes without any proof, and she wants the board to stop this meeting immediately and refer the matter to the attorney. Richard says, "Sit down, Amy. We are going to hear all the evidence before we make any decisions." Amy says she refuses to sit here and be attacked, and she is walking out. Richard says if she walks out, the board will proceed without her, and her absence will be noted in the minutes. Amy sits back down, but she is glaring at me like she is planning my funeral. I continue. I show the board the cease and desist email and the restraining order petition. I explain that both were filed within hours of Richard scheduling this meeting, and both are clearly designed to intimidate me and derail the investigation. I show the email from the HOA attorney retracting the cease and desist after Richard intervened. I explain that Amy has a pattern of using threats, procedural tricks, and retaliation to silence anyone who questions her, and the board has a duty to stop it. Richard asks the treasurer, Scott, if he can confirm that he gave his password to Amy. Scott says yes, he gave it to her 6 months ago, and he did not think to change it afterward. Richard asks Scott if he made any changes to my payment status. Scott says no, he has not logged into the admin portal in over a month. Richard asks Amy if she used Scott's login to change my payment status. Amy says she did not, and she has no idea who did, and this whole thing is a witch hunt. Richard says we have an admin log showing the change was made by a board officer account, and Scott is saying he did not do it, so the only other people with access are the president and the secretary, and neither of them have any reason to target me. Amy says maybe the system glitched. Richard says systems do not glitch in ways that selectively target people who file disputes. Miguel stands up from the back row and says he wants to add something. Richard asks who he is, and Miguel introduces himself and says he works for a maintenance company that does contract work for Clearbrook Estates. He says Amy called his company 2 days ago and tried to get them to tow my truck without proper authorization, and his boss refused because Amy could not provide documentation. He says Amy has a reputation among vendors for pressuring them to act first and get authorization later, and a lot of vendors do not want to work with her anymore because of it. He says a tow company refusing to act without proper authorization is exactly what happened to me, and it proves Amy is willing to bypass procedure to get what she wants. Amy stands up again and says Miguel is lying, and she never called his company. Miguel pulls out his phone and says he has the call log if she wants to see it. Amy says call logs do not prove anything. Miguel says fine, I also have a voicemail you left when my boss did not answer. Do you want me to play it for the board? Amy goes quiet. Richard says yes. Play it. Miguel plays the voicemail on speaker, and everyone hears Amy's voice saying she needs an emergency tow for a non-compliant vehicle, and she will send the authorization later, and she needs it done today because the homeowner is causing problems. The timestamp on the voicemail is 2 days ago, the day after Richard scheduled this meeting. Richard looks at Amy and says, do you want to explain that? Amy says she was trying to enforce the rules, and I was being uncooperative and she had every right to call a tow company. Richard says you had no right to call a tow company for a payment that was already made and you deliberately erased. Amy says she did not erase anything, and this is all circumstantial. Richard says we have an admin log, a confession from Scott about the password, a pattern of retaliation, a fraudulent harassment charge, a restraining order petition full of lies, and now a voicemail proving you tried to bypass procedure again. He says this is not circumstantial, this is a documented pattern of misconduct, and the board has a fiduciary duty to act. Richard asks the board to vote on 3 motions. First, drop the harassment charge against me immediately. The board votes yes unanimously, except Amy abstains. Second, reverse the payment status change and refund any fees I was charged related to the fake delinquency. The board votes yes unanimously, except Amy abstains. Third, suspend Amy from all compliance and enforcement duties pending a full audit of the HOA financials and the admin portal access logs. The board votes yes unanimously, except Amy votes no. Richard says the motions pass and Amy is suspended effective immediately. He says the board will retain an independent auditor to review the reserve account, the vendor payments, and the payment portal activity going back 3 years. He says if the audit finds evidence of fraud or embezzlement, the board will refer the matter to law enforcement. Amy stands up and says this is a coup, and she is going to sue the board for defamation and wrongful termination. Richard says you are not being terminated. You are being suspended pending investigation, and if you want to sue, that is your right, but the board has insurance and you do not. Amy grabs her laminated policy sheet, her handheld radio, and her bright phone case, and she storms out of the room. The door slams behind her, and the whole room is silent for about 5 seconds. Then someone in the back row starts clapping, and a few other people join in. Richard holds up his hand and says we are not done yet. We still need to discuss next steps. Richard says the board is going to hire an auditor this week, and the audit should be complete within 30 days. He says the board is also going to review the compliance process and make changes to prevent this from happening again. He says one change will be requiring two-factor authentication for all admin portal logins, so nobody can use someone else's password. Another change will be requiring board approval for any vendor payments over $1,000, with receipts and invoices on file before the payment is made. Another change will be requiring all compliance charges to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before they are posted to a homeowner's account. He says these changes will be voted on at the next regular board meeting, and homeowners are encouraged to attend and provide input. I ask Richard what happens to the restraining order petition. He says that is a separate legal matter, and I need to show up to the hearing and present my evidence. He says the board cannot help with that, but he will provide a letter confirming that the board investigated Amy's allegations and found them to be without merit. I say thank you, that will help. The meeting adjourns, and several homeowners come up to me and thank me for speaking up. One woman says she got hit with a violation last year for a fence that was 2 inches too tall, and she always thought it was retaliation for complaining about noise from the pool, but she could not prove it. Another man says he got charged a late fee even though he paid on time, and when he disputed it, Amy told him the dispute process requires a $50 filing fee, and he just paid the late fee because it was cheaper than fighting. I give them both my email, and I say if they have documentation, send it to me, because the auditor is going to want to see everything. Miguel walks out with me and says he is glad the board did the right thing. He says a lot of vendors have been frustrated with Amy for years, but nobody wanted to speak up because they were afraid of losing the HOA contract. He says now that she is suspended, maybe the board will start working with vendors who actually follow procedure. I thank him for showing up and for playing the voicemail. He says no problem, and if I need anything else, just call. I drive home and I check the HOA portal, and the harassment charge is gone. My payment status is back to paid. There is a credit on my account for the late penalty and the compliance processing charge, and there is a note saying the charges were reversed due to administrative error. I take a screenshot and I save it in my binder. The restraining order hearing is the following Wednesday. I show up with my binder, the recording of the tow driver interaction, the retraction email from the HOA attorney, and the letter from Richard confirming the board found no evidence to support Amy's allegations. Amy shows up with a lawyer. Her lawyer stands up and says Amy has been subjected to a campaign of harassment and intimidation by me, and she fears for her safety. The lawyer presents the restraining order petition and asks the judge to grant it. The judge asks me if I want to respond. I stand up and I say I have never harassed Amy. I have never threatened her, and I have never been to her home. I say I recorded one interaction on my own property during a tow threat, and I sent one email to the HOA board disputing a false charge. I say Amy filed this petition the same day the board scheduled an emergency meeting to investigate her conduct, and the timing is not a coincidence. I hand the judge my binder, the recording, the retraction email, and Richard's letter. The judge takes a few minutes to review everything, then she asks Amy's lawyer if Amy has any evidence that I went to her home or made any threats. The lawyer says no, but Amy feels threatened by my continued presence in the neighborhood. The judge says feeling threatened is not the same as being threatened, and there is no evidence here to support a restraining order. The judge denies the petition and dismisses the case. Amy does not look at me. She and her lawyer walk out of the courtroom without saying a word. I pack up my binder and I leave. 3 weeks later, the audit is complete. The auditor presents the findings to the board at a special meeting, and homeowners are invited to attend. I sit in the front row. The auditor says the reserve account is short by approximately $43,000 over a 3-year period. The auditor says the shortfall is due to multiple vendor payments that were not supported by invoices or receipts, and several of those payments were made to companies that are either defunct or untraceable. The auditor says one of the companies, Rapid Response Services, is registered to Amy Reed, and it received 6 payments totaling $18,000 for jobs that were never performed and never listed in the approved budget. The auditor says the payment portal activity log shows Amy used Scott's login to change the status of multiple homeowner payments over the past 2 years, and in every case, the homeowner had recently filed a dispute or questioned a fee. The auditor says the pattern is consistent with intentional retaliation and financial misconduct. Richard thanks the auditor and asks the board to vote on a resolution. The resolution states that Amy Reed is removed from all board positions and committees effective immediately, and the board is referring the audit findings to the district attorney for possible criminal prosecution. The resolution also states that the board is implementing the new compliance process controls discussed at the prior meeting, and the board is offering refunds to any homeowner who was wrongly charged a fee due to Amy's misconduct. The board votes yes unanimously. The district attorney follows up 2 months later. Amy is charged with theft by deception, computer fraud, and abuse of fiduciary duty. She pleads no contest and is sentenced to probation, restitution, and community service. She is also banned from serving on any HOA board in the state for 10 years. The HOA compliance process is audited and cleaned up, and the new controls are working. Vendor payments now require invoices and board approval. Compliance charges require dual review. Admin portal logins require 2-factor authentication. The neighborhood feels different. People are not afraid to ask questions anymore. I still live in Clearbrook Estates, and I still manage my restaurant kitchen, and I still support my family back home. But now when I check the HOA portal, I do not have to worry that my payment is going to disappear, or that I am going to get a violation notice for something I did not do. And when I see the new rules enforcement chair at the mailbox cluster, we just nod and say good morning, because that is all it should ever be. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you being here.